Live, trance, and prosper. Hi, I'm Dr. David Phillips. It's Wednesday, and so that means tips, tricks, ideas, methods, and concepts related to social influence, hypnosis, communication, and the like. This week, I'm going to be talking to you a bit about fact, value, and policy. That is, assertions or questions of fact, value, and policy. Now, at the university, I've been teaching communication for a lot of years, and I've taught it for a number of years before then. I've been teaching communication and speech, social influence, public speaking for almost 3 decades. Whew, I'm so old. And in that time, one of the things I do need to talk to folks, especially related to critical thinking or critical concepts, is the distinction between assertions or questions of fact, value, and policy. You'll find a lot of folks kind of muddle them up. Now, as a university professor, I give my students assignments, and we break those assignments into different types of speeches. Speech of information to inform people, an entertainment speech, a demonstration speech, a persuasive speech, and we artificially distinguish between those because there are different types or purposes of speaking or speech purposes. See a video that I did recently on that. Just go click on the channel and you'll find speech purposes on my YouTube channel. But when you decide your purpose, you also need to have a thesis statement. Now, a thesis statement, I know some folks, they hear that and they think high school or college writing, and they start panicking. Oh my God, I have to have a thesis statement. But all that is a statement that lets you organize your thoughts. And so before you communicate with other people, you need to decide, what's my purpose? Inform, entertain, persuade. And then what kind of question do I need to answer? So I ask a question and then answer it, or what sort of statement do I need to make? That's an assertion. There are essentially 3 types of assertions. They are fact, value, and policy. Now, a thesis of fact asserts that something meets a definitional standard, as in a law or according to usage, or that some good or bad situation exists, like prosperity or depression, or that it exists to a sufficient or alarming extent. Now, a thesis of value asserts that something is good or bad or worthwhile or not worthwhile ad infinitum, ethically, morally, aesthetically, professionally, or in some similar way related to value. An example of some assertions might be something like, Taiwan pensioners on fixed incomes are experiencing significant difficulties. That's an assertion of fact. Now, an assertion of value might be, colleges and universities are justified in subsidizing student athletes. Note, that's a justified is your key word there. That's an assertion of value. Neither one of those is an assertion of policy. They might be related to a speech of that type, in terms of they might share a context, but they're not assertions of policy which advocates a particular kind of solution to a problem. Assertions of policy would be too broad to fit many communication events, but they're certainly appropriate for others. Either fact or value might be included as a subordinate assertion in a long speech which proposes a policy. But by themselves, those two examples I just gave are fact and value. Okay? Now, when we look at assertions of policy, we need to be aware that they tend to pull in more information and study. And so for some information context, like if you're doing a really short speech or something like that, this kind of thing would be too broad. For instance, marijuana should be legalized in Taiwan. That's a thesis of policy, and it's too broad for an information-raising context. Countries that have legalized marijuana have lower crime rates associated with illegal drugs and have increased revenues from taxation. Now that, while it is a longer thesis or assertion, it's actually more appropriate for an information-raising context, and it can be supported by testimony. It's a limited assertion of fact. Now, factual testimony could consist of comparison statistics considering the number of crimes associated with marijuana or other drugs in a society, as well as longitudinal statistics on those crimes or on other things. You might compare countries which have legalized marijuana, or in the U.S. it would be states that have or have not legalized, compared to those that have not over several years, ideally. Okay, and you also would look at things like tax rates and income revenues compared to expenditures on crime and things like crime prevention and prison and things like that. Testimony for a subject like that might include, it comes from expert testimony or citations of people who are experts in drugs and in health on the basis of their observations. Okay? Now, here are some examples of appropriately limited informative context type thesis statements for a simple information raising speech. Okay? And they're of a wide variety of types. Okay? So here are some. Sex education leads to fewer cases of unwanted pregnancy and disease while delaying sexual activity in young people. Suitably limited to information raising. Stereophotography has uses in many areas of science and entertainment. Assertion of fact. Prostitution is much more common and less insidious than most people think. Fact and value. Hypnotism is an accepted way of treating patients in dentistry. Fact. It's an assertion of fact. You may or may not disagree with it, but it is an assertion that would need to be backed up with testimony and that sort of thing. And that particular one, no problem. Sexual harassment in the workplace affects most women. Straightforward assertion of fact. A sad fact, but a real one nonetheless. Informal polygamous relationships are becoming more prevalent than before. Statement of fact, which would require quite a bit of backup. Please understand that assertions of fact, value, and policy may or may not be true. Ideally, you're making truthful statements, and you need to back them up with critical evidence and things like that. Some of my students have difficulty telling the difference or discriminating against different types of assertions or questions. And so hopefully you find this helpful. This has been Dr. Brian David Phillips, and I hope you subscribe to the channel and be sure to click like on YouTube. Okay? Now, stick around for Tuesdays. Be sure to subscribe to us, because on Tuesdays we have news and rants. On Wednesdays, more tips, tricks, methods, and information. Thursdays, trance time, where we do some neat little guided visualizations and things like that. Until next time, this is Dr. Brian David Phillips saying bye-bye.